Bendor, thank you so much for joining us at the National today.
Great pleasure.
We're finding ourselves in front of a painting that's normally over at the Portrait on Queen Street, Alexander Nasmyth's portrait of Raeburn Burns, painted in 1787 here in Edinburgh. And there's a very special reason for it being here, which is that we have on loan the recently rediscovered portrait by Henry Raeburn. You were able to see the Raeburn before it was restored. What were you looking for?
Well, it's so lovely to see this amazing display you've done here.
Thank
It's
you.
so exciting to see the two pictures side by side for the first time since, 1803 or something?
Yes, yeah.
But the first time I saw this picture was just through photographs online. But my immediate reaction was, crikey, that looks like a Raeburn, even though it wasn't catalogued as a Raeburn.
Of course, it was in the manner of
Yeah.
Henry Raeburn, wasn't it?
When the auctioneers describe something as in the manner of, it usually means like a fake. And I thought, it looks like the real deal. The only hesitation I had were two hesitations. First of all, it was actually quite dirty and under a sort of yellow varnish, and it had some damage. So when you've got a picture like that, as you know, it's quite difficult to be certain about what's kind of beneath.
Yeah, for sure.
But oddly enough, the other thing was, because it's actually in really good condition, for a moment it did look a bit new. And I thought, well, maybe that's why they think it's a sort of modern fake.
Yeah, something to be careful about,
Yeah.
for sure.
In art historical terms, we call this connoisseurship, don't we? Which is a fancy way of saying how to recognize an artist's hand in a picture. And particularly the way he not only applies the paint with these sort of big, fat, confident strokes, and sometimes a very square brush, but just the way he also lights a painting is very dramatic. And there was one area in particular that caught my eye, which is the junction over his Raeburn Burns' shoulder on the left as we look at the painting, which is, when you look at it up close, it shouldn't really make any sense at all, because it's two very abrupt straight lines, almost like it's done with a ruler.
Yeah.
And you would normally say, well, an artist wouldn't do something so simplistic as just go straight with a big fat black brush. But it just works because of Raeburn's magical skill of making the light work, and that is all part of the kind of the visual drama that he brings to pictures. So what I'm trying to say is that was one of the kind of visual tells that you can see in a picture like this, even though, of course, the painting's not actually signed Raeburn himself. It's as good as a signature when you see that kind of distinctive stroke.
The fact that Raeburn is commissioned to create this copy of Nasmyth, it's a slightly odd thing, isn't it? Because Nasmyth is still around, he's still active. He
Yes.
has shifted from portraiture, which he did do
Yes.
more of in his early career. He's shifted to landscape. He's kind of on his way to becoming, as David Wilkie would have it, the founder of the Scottish School of Landscape Painting. But it's Raeburn who gets asked to produce this
Yes.
copy for Cadell Davies.
Yes.
And it's worth saying that the reason why people knew that it was around is because of some documentary evidence, isn't it?
When I saw the picture at auction, and when William Sachs rang me up and very quickly started doing some digging, and then realised there was this all this evidence to say that Raeburn had painted the portrait and it had been missing for 200 years, and then it just gets more and more exciting. You think, oh my God, is this the one? And then it's all, panic stations and contain the excitement until the day of the auction.
And that documentary evidence was kind of the ideal piece of evidence, wasn't it, in terms of it being letters?
Yes.
Some of them in William Sachs's collection.
Yes. So we got Raeburn literally saying, I have painted this and I am sending it to you, and it's going to cost you £20. And then William Sachs had a copy of the letter confirming the same thing. And then one of the other extraordinary things about, which led to so much evidence being published that this painting had once existed, is that there's this extraordinary fellow called Barrington Nash, who thinks he's found not only one lost Raeburn of Raeburn Burns, but two more, so 3 in total. And he thinks that they have come to him from the voice of Raeburn Burns himself. He believes in spiritualism. Lots of Burns scholars, when they're trying to disprove this fellow Barrington Nash's discoveries, they then publish the evidence the actual evidence about Raeburn's lost painting. So that was quite helpful to us when we were trying to piece all the puzzle together.
And that was the evidence that confirmed, yes, it definitely, what you're looking for is something that looks very much like an Nasmyth,
Yes.
but infused with that
Yes.
instantly recognizable style of a Raeburn.
Yeah.
We know that Burns sat to Nasmyth for the 1787 portrait.
Yeah.
He himself says, I've sat for it half a dozen times. And Nasmyth and Burns became friends as well. With Raeburn, it's not quite so clear. There's been a lot of kind of speculation about did they or didn't they meet? Would their timelines overlap? Probably they did. Raeburn was back in Edinburgh freshly back from his trip to Italy while Burns was in the city, but we don't have any evidence that they ever did meet. Why is this so important that they should have met?
I think it's lovely to think that Raeburn put some of his own observations of Burns into the picture. And I think that would help explain some of the differences between Raeburn's painting and the Nasmyth. I mean, Raeburn, he does do some little tweaks with the picture. First of all, the landscape is very different. The lighting's very different. But the angle of the head is different. And just the overall approach to the features, I think, it feels to me like the Nasmyth gives you a likeness of Burns, but the Raeburn gives you Burns himself. And that's a subjective view, isn't it? Because, we weren't there. And Raeburn paints people that Burns knew, like his great chum, Cunningham, Alexander Cunningham, the fiddler, Neil Gow, all around the same time. And then there's this extraordinary little subscription that after Burns dies, Raeburn contributes to the sort of like a hardship fund for Burns' family in 1796. And he's one of only 42 people to do that. And Raeburn's actually one of the more generous benefactors,
Right.
£2, 2 shillings. And there's this, you can see the list, and it's rather nice because Raeburn's name is on the list right next to Alexander Cunningham's.
Oh, right, yeah.
And in the nexus of people who are responsible for this portrait coming about, Burns, Raeburn, and Alexander Cunningham and Nasmyth, they're all there. So I think it's more likely than not that Raeburn knew briefly or had seen Burns, and it's certain that he held him in high regard. And I think that probably explains what makes the picture work so well as much more than just one artist copying another.
And Cunningham, of course, was the person who kind of brokered that commission.
Yeah,
he
quite.
made sure that the Nasmyth portrait was available for Raeburn to copy.
Without wanting to be too rude about, one of your most important pictures in the collection here, and it is a fabulous picture, historically extremely significant picture.
Yes.
There is something going on where it feels like people are not satisfied with that really capturing the man. And I think it's understandable that Cadell Davies wanting to have a new edition, Burns is famous, they want something that's got just a little bit more oomph. And so they ask around for the leading artists of the day in Edinburgh, and they are steered towards Raeburn Studio.
Copies were not inferior in any way, were they?
No, and Raeburn was delighted to do copies. I mean, he took the money and ran. I mean, I think we know that he did more than 30 copies of various works, and sometimes he would do 2 versions of a copy. But what's really interesting, when you see Raeburn's copies of work by other artists, they're always Raeburn's. Lots of artists doing, workshop copies or copying other work will strive to faithfully follow the original. But Raeburn feels, there's always a feeling that he goes, I can do better than that. Dare I say it, I think in this case, in terms of a kind of romantic, striking image, I think he has.
And I think that's where that fluidity that you've spoken about earlier comes back in, doesn't it? With those fluid, dynamic brush strokes. He's not feeling that he has to exactly follow the original. He's just doing his own thing, but kind of as an homage almost to Nasmyth.
Yes, I think so. And he just feels very alive and very heroic.
It's certainly true that Nasmyth portrait has been distributed worldwide. I mean, that image has traveled the world through engravings. Of course, it was originally painted to be engraved in the same way that the Raeburn commission was intended for an engraving, but then it was used as the basis for sculptures of Burns, including the lovely John Flaxman that we've got on loan from Edinburgh City Council over at the Portrait.
Yeah.
But then it also went on to biscuit tins, stamps.
I've seen a cake.
Oh, wow.
Based on that, yeah.
That proliferation of the image, I think, again, I think it's a useful reminder for just how important painted copies and engraved images were.
People instinctively wanted to have an image of the man whose voice was in their head. And that image has become so famous. I mean, it's on cigarette cards, and our dear friend Dr William Sachs has got the most amazing collection of what he calls Burnsiana. And it's just so lovely to see that face popping out at you from bottles, cigarette packets, tea towels, as you say. It's just everywhere.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, one of the lovely facts that William Sachs has ended up with the Raeburn portrait. It's like talking about icing on the cake.